Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our virtual class series, Tough Plants for North Texas. Today we're talking about perennials. Before I introduce our speaker and we start talking about plants, I'm going to talk about TRWD. This presentation is sponsored by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains all of the 4 lakes and all of the pipelines that are needed to supply surface water to local water treatment plants. And those water treatment plants treat it to drinking water standards and then provide it to our communities. TRWD also partners with many cities in Tarrant County, like Fort Worth, Mansfield, and Arlington, to provide water conservation education and programming. Water conservation is an important water supply strategy in order to meet the needs of our growing population, and that's why TRWD supports things like this. If you go to savetarrantwater.com, you can sign up for a free sprinkler check if you're a Tarrant County resident. That's where a licensed irrigator will come to your house for free, and they will give you a full evaluation of your sprinkler system. They'll let you know if there's any maintenance that is needed, and they can give you tips on how you can reduce water waste. You can also sign up for free weekly watering advice that's custom to your location at savetarrantwater.com. For that, you'll receive an email every Monday or a text message, whatever you choose, and it'll let you know how much you should water your lawn that week based on the weather. You can also look at a calendar of events, look at future classes and events just like this one. There are also water saving tips and videos, and if you missed part 1 of this, you can find a recording of the part 1 virtual class there. TRWD also partners with other organizations like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Tarrant County Master Gardeners to provide outdoor watering and gardening education programs just like this one. So now that I've told you a little bit about TRWD, I'm going to go ahead and start our program. Our speaker today is Toni Moorhead. She's a Tarrant County Master Gardener, and she also owns her own landscaping business. She's going to be talking to us today about the best perennials to plant in your North Texas yard. I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to Toni now and let her begin.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, let me see if I can get this up and running here. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen. I'm so excited to talk about this. Is my favorite subject in gardening, perennials. So we're just going to get right to it. Some things that I want you to consider when you're choosing perennials. We'll go through all of those. Soil prep, we talked about this in the first session. Whether you have clay or sandy soil, acidic or alkaline, you can get a soil test, and you can look for the address of that on the first program. But regardless of the soil type, be sure to add compost. That improves your drainage and nutrients in your soil, and then add expanded shale for clay soils if you have plants like salvias that need really good drainage. Okay, plant selection, you want to choose, when do you want the blooms, what color, different heights, different textures. Do you want them to have a fragrance? Are they going to be near your patio so you can enjoy the fragrance? Do you want evergreen or deciduous? And then consider the mature size. We talked a lot about that last time. Be sure to read the plant tag and get all the information on it. And then of course we want to use native and adapted plants in our garden because they work. And look for plants that are rated for zone 8A. Look for plants that are in the zone 6 to 9. That's the sweet spot of hardiness. So light requirements, when you're looking at that tag, look for whether it's a plant for sun or shade, and we'll be going through all of the different perennials for sun and shade. So if it says it needs full sun, that means 6+ hours. If you try to put a full sun perennial in a part shade area, it's just going to stretch and not perform very well. So be sure to do what I call a sun chart. I talked about that in the first program as well, where you make a chart from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and just take a look at that spot that you're wanting to landscape and write a little note, sun, shade, sun, or shade. And by the end of the 12-hour day, you will know how much sun that area is getting, and you can choose your plants accordingly. All right, mulch, just a non-negotiable. You've got to mulch after you plant your perennials. It conserves moisture, it helps to prevent soil erosion, and it cuts down on weeds, and it protects your roots, and then it continues to break down, which builds your soil and adds more nutrients. And then watering, we recommend watering deeply but less frequently, about 1 inch per week. We recommend watering early in the morning, so not at night, but follow your city water restrictions, which is usually in the summertime. Well, actually it's permanent restrictions now, no more than twice a week. And just because you can doesn't mean that you have to. I hope everyone's sprinklers are turned off right now because we had so much rain on Saturday that we can leave them off for at least a week. And so I also recommend doing what's called cycle and soak with your sprinkler system, so that you run all of your zones, let them sit for a while, like 30 minutes, then run them all again, and possibly run them a third time. So for instance, instead of running a zone for 20 minutes, you would run it twice for 10, just as an example, because you get better soaking into your soil that way, and you can go longer between waterings that way. If you water every single day, your roots are just going to stay on the surface, and they're not going to dig deep to find water because they don't have to. So we want to encourage deep roots. All right, maintenance. With perennials, when you're planting perennials is low maintenance, in that they're only planted once, but there is weeding and deadheading. Deadheading means you're just cutting off spent blooms. So that is something that you have to keep doing, and they're pruned at certain times of the year. And we talked about that last time as well, so review that. And then as they start growing, then you have to dig and divide them so that they don't take over parts of your garden. And the last thing I want you to consider is having patience with your perennials. The first year, they say they sleep, so they're just establishing a root system, and the next year they creep, so their tops are starting to grow a little bit more, and by that third year, they're leaping, and that's what we want to get to. So, and every year after that, when they leap a little bit more, then you may want to rein them back in, and that's when you dig and divide and share them with your friends. So we're first of all going to talk about perennials for sunny areas. This happens to be my front yard in the fall. I took this picture a few years ago, so it just shows lots of fall blooming perennials. This is my front yard in the middle of probably July, when the rudbeckia and the phlox are in full bloom. And then I'll show you later a picture of my garden in the wintertime. But I could definitely be considered a horticulturist. I have a lot of plants, and I love perennials, and I'm just always planting more. All right, this is a client of mine in Colleyville. Just shows how we landscaped up her front lawn with perennials. And there's a few annuals in here too. And at the very end of this section, I will name some top annuals that I like to use. It just makes that walk up to the front door and down to the mailbox really enjoyable when you've got all these blooming plants, and the pollinators that it brings is just incredible. All right, so the first sunny perennial I want to talk about, or the first category, are salvias. I cannot landscape a sunny landscape without using salvias. There's so many of them. The first picture with the monarch is Salvia farinacea. And this variety that I like to use is called Henry Dulberg, and it attracts monarchs and bumblebees like crazy, honeybees. And then the next picture to the right is a Salvia greggii, which happens to be my favorite perennial of all. It blooms almost non-stop through the whole summer. And then Salvia leucantha, or Mexican bush sage, is the purple spiky one. It only blooms in the fall, grows quite large. And then Salvia darcii is the red one down in the bottom picture. Very large perennial as well. Full blasting sun. So here's Salvia greggii, my favorite perennial of all. But the tip on this plant is to cut it back down to 6 inches every mid-February. The plant itself during the growing season will grow almost, well, 2.5 feet tall and at least 3 feet wide, but just chop it back down to 6 inches, and that keeps it from getting woody and rangy, and it will bloom much better for you. And then during the growing season, as it kind of fades out of bloom, then give it a little haircut of about 3 inches, and it'll flush out and blooms again. All right, this is Henry Dulberg, Salvia farinacea, and behind that, which is the blue variety, and then Augusta Dulberg is the white variety behind that. This plant will grow about 3 feet tall and wide. And I always tell people, set your boundaries for Henry. And if he creeps beyond that, start digging him out. And then here's my tip on growing Henry Dulberg. It's when it gets tall and what I call leggy, where the bottom leaves fall off and the top blooms start to fade, just chop it to the ground anytime during the growing season. Just chop it down. And in just a couple weeks, it will be full and compact again and be blooming shortly thereafter. So don't be afraid to chop that plant down. All right, another kind of salvia, Salvia nemorosa, May night salvia. And there's a Snow Hill, which is the white variety. There's one called Blue Hill, East Friesland. There's lots of small salvias in this grouping. They will bloom all summer. Their most prolific time is in spring, early summer, but if you keep deadheading them, just keep cutting off those spent blooms, they will keep blooming more and more. But this one only grows about a foot tall and wide. Rudbeckia, or black-eyed Susan, very bright yellow color in your garden. It'll grow 2.5 to 3 feet tall. I do think that this plant prefers a little bit of afternoon sun, though. Goldsturm is a very common variety, and then Triloba is a little bit taller and the blooms are a little bit smaller. But I love to pair this plant with phlox, which I'm going to talk about right now. So summer phlox will grow about 3 feet tall as well, attracts swallowtail butterflies like crazy, and the bees love this plant as well. Victoria and John Fanick are 2 Texas superstar varieties, so very good varieties. I have found John Fanick seems to be susceptible to powdery mildew, which it's not supposed to, but you can spray that with neem oil if you want, not in the heat of the day, but in the evening. If you spray that, it will stop it from spreading. Or you can also just chop the plant down and it will come back later and cleaner. You'll bloom later, but at least you'll get rid of the powdery mildew. So it's kind of an unfortunate thing. I haven't ever seen powdery mildew on the Victoria variety though, so look for that one. Okay, purple coneflower, most of us are familiar with that. It too will grow about 3 feet tall. There's lots of new varieties of this, double blooms. There's an orange bloom, yellow. There's a white one, I think it's called White Swan. So look for those. I find that just the old-fashioned, they're actually pink, but they call them purple coneflower. I think that they do the best. I just think they're beautiful. All right, and lots of sunny perennials like it very, very hot, which is a good thing because August is coming, right? So Blackfoot daisy, this plant needs almost desert conditions. It is so fragrant and it will bloom all summer long in the hottest, driest spot of your yard. Don't give it too much water. It'll grow about a foot tall and probably 4 feet wide and bloom its head off. And then Zexmenia, another is a native, bloom in the yellow there, about 1.5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, blooms all summer long. Purple Heart, I think we all know that. I think Wandering Jew is a common name for that. This is a larger variety, again, can handle just beating down unrelenting heat. I have it growing on right on the hot reflective area by my front sidewalk. And then of course lantana, all kinds of lantana. There's very large varieties and newer, smaller varieties. This is my front parkway strip and perennial bed behind that in August. And there's some annuals blooming in here too, some periwinkles. But there's salvias in here, phlox, Purple Heart, Zexmenia, Blackfoot daisy, some azure skies heliotrope, which is an excellent ground cover type perennial. All right, Zexmenia, again, I just mentioned this one. It's native. It will bloom all summer long, hottest, driest spot of your yard. And this is four-nerve daisy. It's a very small perennial, only grows about 1 foot tall and wide, but it just needs hot, blasting sun to do well. And don't water it too much. It can rot. Just give it really good drainage. Here I have it planted in my parkway strip with May night salvia, some sedums, some bath pink dianthus. I'll talk about that in a minute. Sundrops or callilophus. This one blooms really only prolifically in March or April timeframe. So if you wanted a yellow mounding perennial, I'd probably use Zexmania over Calilophus, but if you've got room for this plant, it's a great bloomer as well. And then Katie's Ruellia, or dwarf Mexican petunia. This is a plant that I just tuck along the front of the border in little spots. It does pop seeds, but they're very easy to weed out. I normally do not recommend the tall variety of Mexican petunia because it's very invasive. It's a tough perennial, but surrounded by concrete because it can spread very prolifically by root and seeds. So just be careful where you plant the tall variety. But this one, there's a pink variety and a white variety, and it stays very small. It's just easy to tuck in at the front of your border. Rock rose, again, very, very heat and drought tolerant. There's a white variety called Brazilian rock rose, and then the regular one is pink. Give it lots of sunshine. It's going to grow about 3 feet tall and wide, blooms all summer long. And then lamb's ear. It does not, well, the old-timey variety does bloom, but this is a Helen von Stein. It's the variety that I recommend using. It's called big ear lamb's ear, and it typically doesn't bloom. You may have a random bloom here and there, but as a general rule, does not bloom. And so this plant just needs a little grooming, maybe a few times a year, where you just pull off dried leaves on it. But other than that, it's evergreen and really soft foliage on it. I like to have kids plant this because it's just so fun for them to feel the plant. This is Jerusalem sage. This looks to me like lamb's ear on steroids. It's got the same fuzzy gray green leaves, but it grows about 4 feet tall and wide. So give this one a lot of room. There's 2 varieties of it. Russelliana has a larger leaf than Fruticosa. And then it gets these really neat whorls of blooms, they're called, these yellow blooms that just have a little bloom, and it comes up on a stem and blooms again and comes up on another stem. So it'll bloom, all of May and June, and then it's pretty much done blooming for the year, but you can cut it back if it gets a little bit too big, but other than that, you don't have to do really anything to this plant. If you allow 4-foot space for it, you don't have to do anything to it. All right, Powys Castle Artemisia. This is an extremely drought tolerant plant. This is out of clients of mine in Grapevine, and this little corner of their yard does not get any irrigation. So all the plants in there are existing on rainwater alone. And I know we've had a lot this year, but the faucet's going to turn off pretty soon here. So this is planted with purple heart and cacti, prickly pear cacti, and then Zexmania in the background, some Mexican feathergrass, and color guard yucca. So my tip on this plant, it's going to grow about 1.5 feet tall and at least 4 feet wide. Cut it back in February down to 6 inches. Just chop it back, or it too will get very woody and rangy. And if you cut it back early or late winter, it will perform much better. All right, Santolina is the little gray plant in the foreground there. Again, don't give this too much water, it'll rot. It blooms yellow in the summertime. I don't care for the blooms on this plant, so I do cut those off, but I love the foliage of it. It's very fragrant. It's just a heat-loving, tough plant, and I have it here planted in front of that Zexmania behind it, so you can see what those two look like. Again, drought tolerant. Red yucca, you see those as you drive around right now in the medians. Oh my goodness, they're blooming their heads off right now. They look so pretty. And red yucca is about the closest plant to furniture you can put in your garden. I mean, you just do nothing to this plant. And it's evergreen. You can cut the spent blooms off of it if you want, but that you never cut the foliage. Just give it at least 4 feet of space to grow wide, because it does grow rather large, but extremely drought tolerant, can exist on rainwater alone. Excellent plant. There's lots of new varieties of that. There's a smaller one called Break Lights that has very red blooms, and there's also a yellow blooming variety. Russian sage, again, very drought tolerant. Think Lubbock where it never rains. But just about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, this plant will get, with the lavender spiky blooms on it. And then here's a really short lavender type bloom. It's called Gray Creeping Germander. kind of hard to find. Stiegels down in Fort Worth always carries this plant, so if you ever get down there, go see Jim and tell him I sent you. He's got a lot of great perennials down there, and he is, if you think I'm passionate about this subject, he blows me away. Anyway, this gray creeping germander only grows about 3 inches tall, but about 1 foot to 2 feet wide, just hugs the ground with these cute little lavender blooms on it. All right, color guard yucca. This is, again, very drought tolerant. I'm seeing them rotting in some places this year because we've had so much rain. So make sure you give it really good drainage. If you have that clay, heavy clay soil, be sure you mix in expanded shale so it's got great drainage. If you can mulch it with a gravel area, that's even better because this plant loves hot and dry. And it's very pokey. I tend to not like pokey plants, but if you have it out in an area where kids aren't going to fall on it, it'll be fine. But it does send up little pups, they call it. That's how it spreads. So just know that it will send up little baby plants at the base. Pink skullcap, another one of my favorite perennials. It only grows about 8 inches tall, maybe 2 feet wide, with these pink blooms on it all summer long. As hot as it can be, this plant loves it. It's evergreen. There's also a purple variety. In the bottom picture, I show cat mint. It's not mint, it's catmint. And I grow this instead of lavender. Lavender tends not to do that great in our area. It doesn't like our humidity, needs absolutely perfect drainage. So I like to grow catmint instead because it gives you a similar look. It's a gray mounded plant with or lavender blooms. And this will bloom May into June. If it slows down blooming, you can cut it back down to the ground and see if it'll flush back out again and possibly will bloom again. Verbena bonarensis is a very tall verbena, extremely drought tolerant. Put it in the middle of your perennial bed and it will grow at least 4 to 5 feet tall, but it's very airy looking. So it comes up above your other perennials and just kind of sways in the wind. I just love that plant. Verbena bonarensis. All right, sedum, lots of different varieties of sedum. Some are evergreen, some are deciduous. That I love them planted around boulders. They just kind of hug around the rocks and just great plants. They do get little tiny blooms on them. Right now, some of mine are blooming, but I just grow them for the foliage. Again, there's a list right there, lots of varieties. Bass pink dianthus only blooms in March into early April. Very fragrant little blooms, but when it's done blooming, just cut all the blooms off and you'll have a nice gray mound of foliage. Again, do not water this plant too much, it will rot. This is planted in a client's garden and it's in grapevine and it's growing right there by a clematis. And we'll talk about that in the next segment next week about vines. So be sure to tune in for that. All right, butterfly bush in the top left. There's new varieties of butterfly bush that are a little bit smaller. They're the Pugster series. So there's a pink and a purple and a blue variety of Pugster, maybe a white. I'm not sure about that, but this is a white blooming variety that gets very large. It will be all of 4 to 5, if not 6 feet tall and wide. So give that one a lot of room, but the name says it all. It attracts butterflies. And then Gara, again, very, very drought tolerant plant. It will grow about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, but not that wide. It's a narrow, more upright plant, but the common name for it is whirling butterflies because when it sways in the wind, those white blooms tend to look like little butterflies fluttering by. And there's a pink variety as well on that. Flame acanthus is hummingbirds love red tubular plants. So they love this plant and it is extremely drought tolerant, loves the heat, got to have full sun. It will grow very large, at least 4 feet tall and wide though. So know that when you site it in your garden. And then fall aster only blooms in the late fall, usually around November timeframe, but when it blooms, oh my goodness, it's just a purple explosion. But this plant can spread a little bit, so I just say set the boundaries for it and every year kind of rein it in and dig out the outer edge of it and pot it up and give it to some friends. I love planting Mexican mint marigold next to Mexican bush sage because they both bloom at the same time. And if you remember back last week when we talked about color, that opposites attract, always look good together. So here the purple and the yellow look awesome together. My tip about these two plants, any fall blooming perennial really, around July 4th, if you will cut it down by half, it will perform better for you because they get so tall. Some of them get so tall, and then when they bloom in the fall, the blooms are so heavy that the plant will flop over. But if you cut it down by half around July 4th, it sends up more stems, and they're shorter and stronger to support the fall blooms. And then Society Garlic is blooming right now in my garden, and it's got just this pretty little lavender bloom. The thing about this plant, though, is after it freezes, it will smell like a skunk has been walking through your garden. So after it freezes, be sure to cut it down right away, and then the smell will go away. Pale Puma Purple Heart. I love this variety of Purple Heart. It's the compact variety of it, and it's just this beautiful purple color. It grows about a foot tall and probably 2 to 3 feet wide. This plant can be propagated by literally breaking off stems and shoving them in the ground. You don't have to root them, just stick them in the ground with a couple leaf nodes underground, and it will grow for you. And I always have plenty of this to share. Daylilies, I don't know how many varieties of daylilies, but I would say at least 500,000. There's just so many of them. There are early blooming, mid blooming, and late season blooming daylilies. So be sure to check what the time period is that you want this to bloom. My only tip on that would be if you're wanting a late season bloomer, I would choose something that has a lighter color, because that late season bloom usually happens in about end of June and July, and by that time we've got such intense sun that it can really fade out the darker colors. So if you're going to use a darker color, be sure to do an early season bloomer on daylilies. Okay, just to wrap up, just very few of my favorite annuals. I can do a whole program on container gardening and annuals if you're interested in that. But Profusion of Zahara zinnia are just very bright colors for annuals, will last all summer long. And then in the next picture, pentas, periwinkles, and coleus. Great combo for container gardening, or if you want to add some annual color to your garden. They will bloom all summer long and attract, the pentas will attract butterflies like crazy. Okay, so moving on to shade. This is my shady backyard, and it's getting shadier. I've even taken up some more of my grass. I don't have a real recent picture of that, but all right. And this is a client of mine in Grapevine who takes meticulous care of their lovely shade garden. They were on a tour a few years ago. Some of you may have been on that, but we're going to talk about all the lovely plants that they have in their garden. Another client of mine in Keller that they have just turned they've got 2 large trees in their backyard, so no sun. And the ground cover growing between the flagstone is called dwarf mondo. It only grows 2 inches tall. You never have to do anything to it. You don't have to mow it. It's evergreen. Just a great little ground cover between flagstone. Okay, so let's get into the plants. This is Turk's Cap. Now I know this looks like it's in a sunny spot, and it is in this picture, but this plant will grow anywhere from full sun to full shade and everything in between. It attracts hummingbirds like crazy. It is a tough native plant for Texas. Cast iron plant is a foliage plant, but it has to have full shade in your garden. I have a variegated variety, so if you can find that variety, it's really cool. It'll grow about 3 feet tall. It does get a little bit of freeze damage in the winter, but you can cut those leaves off and it'll send up new leaves right after. Well, in May it starts sending, right now it's sending up all of its new growth. So you can trim off any brown leaves and enjoy the new growth. And holly fern is another evergreen plant for shade. It is about 2 feet tall, 2.5 feet tall, and 3 feet wide. Again, evergreen. If it sustains any freeze damage in the winter, you just cut those stems or fronds off and it will send up new growth. You'll see the fiddleheads coming up in very early spring. If you see the specks on the backs of the leaves, don't worry. Those are just baby ferns in the making, but unfortunately we don't have the right kind of conditions for a very long period of time here to be able to germinate those spores, so that you have to have just specialized conditions to get those to germinate. So it's not a disease. I get that question all the time. All right, wood fern. Another great fern for shady areas. It's lighter green. It is deciduous, so it does freeze back in the wintertime, but it comes back again every spring. Here I have it planted with some purple oxalis and amongst leopard plants and Japanese maples and some annual caladiums as well. All right, oxalis is another great perennial for shade. There's purple oxalis, that's called Oxalis triangularis. Every leaf is a triangle, and there's a green variety with a white bloom that's also triangularis, and then there's a green variety with pink blooms, and that one can be a little bit of a pest in your garden, but it does tend to kind of fade away in the summertime, so just enjoy the blooms in the springtime. One problem that I have seen this spring with the purple oxalis is it's getting a fungus called rust, and you'll see rust colored specks on the backs of the leaves. What I do is I just literally rip off all of the stems, the little corms, they're little orange lumpy corms. They will stay in the ground, but you just rip the tops off, throw them away, and then remulch the area. And then when they come back, usually the rains are not as often, and it's hotter and drier, and you won't have the fungal problem anymore with those. All right, columbine, that's a great Texas native. Texas gold is a yellow blooming variety. There's a red variety as well, native to Texas. This one blooms in March time frame, and then when it quits blooming, I usually cut it down to the ground, and then it will send up new foliage again when it cools down again in the fall. And then it will be evergreen through the winter, but it will grow about 2.5 to 3 feet tall. This is tropical giant spider lily. This is another one that's like Turk's cap. It will grow in anything from full sun, maybe not full shade, but anything in between that spectrum. It will grow at least 3 feet tall and wide. It is such a cool tropical looking plant. It's completely hardy. It's only tropical looking, and it blooms usually right on cue on July 4th. I think that's the common name for it, is 4th of July lily. All right, Lenten rose is an evergreen that blooms in winter. It will be blooming in January and February. There's lots and lots of varieties of this. My favorite is called Frost Kiss Molly's White, because I love the variegated foliage of it. If you find this plant, tell me where you found it, because I want to go get some more too. I love that variety. It only blooms white, but I love white blooming perennials in the winter time, because you have leaf debris on the ground, and the white just pops so pretty in the wintertime. All right, these are some up close blooms of hellebores or Lenten rose. Hostas, I don't really recommend for Texas unless you plant them in a container. I grew up in Wisconsin, where they grow hostas like shrubs up there, but here the slugs and the snails tend to chew them to smithereens, and the heat, they don't like it. So I grow them in pots. They tend to do a lot better. But this is the hosta that I grow. It's called African hosta. It doesn't get as big as hostas, but it's a really cool little plant. It has these spots on it. I almost think it looks like a leopard frog, and then it gets these tiny little white blooms on it. The blooms are nothing to write home about, but this is a tough little hosta for Texas. And it is deciduous, so it'll die back down when it freezes, but it comes back every single spring. And then this is a grass for shade. It will reseed very readily, so know that going into it. But there are not a lot of grasses for shade. We'll talk next week about ornamental grasses that do well in sun, but this is one that will do well in shade. But my new favorite plant, I'm just obsessed with this plant right now. It is a new grass for shade. It grows about 18 inches tall and wide, and it's called Everillo. It is in the Southern Living plant collection, and there are other varieties in this collection, Everest, Gold. I'm trying to think of some others, but anyway, this is the one that's lime green, and so far my favorite variety because it's so showy in the shade. All right, so some annuals for shade. Pretty much these are my top 2 annuals for shade. If you will plant these 2 plants, you cannot fail. You just have to plant caladiums when it is warm enough typically when it is 70 degrees at night, which it is right now. So it's fine to plant these. But if you try to plant caladiums in April, they can rot in the ground because it's too cold and too at that time of the year. So make sure you plant those in the when it starts getting hot. And then dragon wing begonias, I'm not talking about little wax leaf begonias, but dragon wing begonias are an amazing, amazing annual in the ground or in pots. All right, some bulbs that do well in our area: grape hyacinth, summer snowflake, Spanish bluebells. I love to plant Spanish bluebells near the columbine I just talked about, the Texas gold columbine, because the yellow and the blue bloom about the same time in the spring. So that's a great combo. And then some daffodils. You want to look for Tazetta varieties that instead of having one single cup, they will have about 5 cups per stem, and they're extremely fragrant. But on the 1 cup variety, Ice Follies and Carlton are great varieties for our area. This is just a picture of my front garden when I have the daffodils blooming in the springtime. So, all right, if you have a brown thumb, you can still have a little bit of color in your garden with some metal art or a bottle tree to add a little color. But hopefully you've gotten some good tips on some plants today, and I hope you go out and try them. These are some books that have been very helpful to me. Steve Huddleston's book is excellent. He's got lots of combos that he talks about in his book. Great pictures. Of course, Neil Sperry, everybody knows Neil, and then Native Plants, and Greg Grant's Home Landscaping book. All excellent, excellent resources for our area. And then here are some websites that I mentioned last time as well. But if you go to Texas Superstar or Texas Smartscape, lots of perennials listed on there. And if you want strictly natives, then go to the Native Plant Society of Texas website. Of course, Tarrant County Master Gardeners can give you information on that. And then the TRWD website, savetarrantwater.com. So any plant that you want to Google, just put tamu.edu in front of the name, and it will give you all of the A&M research information on that plant. I also do have a Facebook page. If you've got questions, you can post them on there, but I do a newsletter 3 times a year and post it on there. And I put that on my blog as well. So if you're interested in that, all free information. And so anyway, again, I hope you are encouraged to try some great perennials. So that's all I have for you. If there's any questions, I think, Heather, I'll turn it back to you, and maybe we can answer some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Tony. That was awesome. Lots of good plants to hear about, and we've got lots of good questions. So let me see real quick. Okay, so we've got somebody that asked, can purple coneflower take full hot sun in the afternoon?
Yes, I think it can. Yes, there's one problem that I have with purple coneflower is it gets a virus called Astor's yellow, and you'll know that you have that if the cone is deformed and it doesn't form any petals, and that is spread by a leafhopper, and I never treat for those, so you have to completely take the plant out because it's a virus, so it's in the plant, you can't get rid of it unless you treat for leafhoppers, and I don't mess with doing that. So look for that. If you see that going on with your coneflower, take it out. But yes, they can handle full sun.
Okay, great. All right, why might my May night salvias not bloom after the first bloom in the spring?
Too much shade, possibly. Just keep cutting them back. That is a plant that if it starts looking a little ratty, I just literally cut it to the ground. It will send up all new foliage and all new blooms. So just don't be afraid to cut your perennials back if they're not performing like you want, because that will rejuvenate them. So I would just make sure you've got really good full sun, give them some fertilizer in April, June, and September, and keep cutting them back if they're slowing on the bloom, because you don't want to set them setting seed. You want them to put energy into making more bloom. So just keep deadheading.
Okay, great. And that's perfect for our next question. What recommendations do you have for fertilizing?
I usually use organic fertilizer. I know in our area, Marshall Grain carries all of those organic varieties, but On my blog site and my summer newsletter, I list all of those fertilizers I've used Bradfield, Texas tea, Milorganite, what else? Oh, I'm trying to think what else I've used. Some of them have got out of business, but anyway, they're stinky. They're usually poultry based or alfalfa based, so they stink for a little bit when you put them down, but I literally do a grab and fling method. I just grab a handful and I fling it into my beds. I don't really measure it. I do a broadcaster for my lawn, and I use the same product on my lawn and my beds. So just grab a handful, fling it in there, and I do it April, June, and September every year.
Okay, great. All right. Any soft color perennials that flower like annuals that can work in pots in full sun?
Lantana, there's if you want a soft color, a white variety. Blackfoot daisy would be awesome in a container. What else? I can give you the name of an annual. Blue days, oh my goodness, that would be awesome in a container. Bloom all summer long, very soft blue color. In fact, you have to see that up close to appreciate it. Very traily plant. What else? All that's coming to my head right now. If I think of another one, I'll shout it out here.
Yeah, I think those are great. Great.
Of course, the salvia is like Victoria salvia. They sell it as an annual, but I don't know why, because it's salvia farinacea, just like Henry Dulberg, and it would work fine in a container as well. So
okay,
it's a little shorter variety. Okay.
Yeah, those are great recommendations. What about these plants in a high pH soil? Are they mostly tolerant?
Yes, everything that I have planted in my garden is in. I had when I did a soil test many years ago, it was 8-1 in my front yard and 7-6 in my backyard. So I have alkaline soil, and all of my plants do great. So I just amend it with compost, but I'm certainly not getting it down to below 7. There's no way I'm getting my pH down below 7. So.
Right, and definitely all of our native plants can handle that because that's what they're used to, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, what would you recommend to replace roses?
Oh, I have a whole program on that too. Salvia greggii, absolutely recommend Salvia greggii to replace, especially to replace drift roses, because it grows about the same size. But I love that. When we talk next week on shrubs, abelias, hands down, I use abelias to replace roses. Now, they're not, for instance, like a knockout, they're not going to give you that knockout color, but they fit the same space, like a kaleidoscope, Canyon Creek, Rose Creek. They all fit the same size as a, for instance, a knockout or another shrub rose. So you can just pop the rose out and put your abelia in, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you get fragrant blooms from those. But we'll talk about shrubs next week. But Salvia greggii, and then also there's a lot of new dwarf crepe myrtles out that will give you all summer very bright, vibrant color that would rival a rose. But they're completely, deciduous, so they're going to lose all their leaves, and you're going to have sticks in the winter. So just know that, when you plant a crepe myrtle in that area. But there's lots of new dwarfs out. And lantana, there's lots of large lantanas that would work well instead of roses, like lantana camera, lantana horrida. I mean, very large, 4 to 5 feet tall and wide lantanas that will bloom all summer long and attract lots of pollinators.
Great, yeah, those are all great recommendations. Okay, so there's a few other questions, but a lot of people have been asking about different nurseries and stuff to get these, so I'm going to put this up. We have, if you go to safetorrentwater.com/pollinator, there's a bunch of resources there for both native and pollinator gardens, and there's a list of nurseries there that carry a lot of native plants that are here in the DFW area in mainland Tarrant County. And then somebody also asked, what was the nursery that you mentioned, Tony?
Steagles, Stegalls, down in Kennedale-ish area, down by Weston Gardens, down in that neck of the woods.
Okay.
Just lots of great perennials, and Jim Steagle, that he is just a trip. He's so fun, so passionate about perennials. So
Great. All right,
yeah.
well, I think that's all the time we have now for questions. If we didn't get to your question, I have your email address and I have your question, so I'll get to you at some point in time this week with an answer, and I'll get with Tony if she needs to help me with the answer. Also, if you have any type of general conservation questions or anything more in depth that you want to ask, you can go to savetarrantwater.com/ask and submit that question there, and we'll get back to you. And then part 3 is next Wednesday. So please join us. You'll get another email with a new link, and it's going to be 7 p.m. next Wednesday. And we're going to be talking again with Tony about vines and bushes and trees for North Texas. Thank you so much, Tony.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week, I hope. Bye.
Yep, thank you for joining us.